come join me at the table as we continue talking about the names of God. Last session, we talked about Christos, meaning Christ, the Anointed One. This session, we're going to talk about the name of God, El Shaddai. So come and let's look at this. I want to read scriptures. The names of God are found throughout the Bible. But when we look at particular names, we can see at different points where the name was used and knowing what they mean, it adds more emphasis to the stories. I don't want to really say stories, but to the stories that we read. The accounts of where God was moving in people's lives. So here, when we look at El Shaddai, we're going to be looking in Genesis. Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. And what I like about this right here is it's God said to him, I am God Almighty. But did you notice the name of who he was talking to? Abram. Not Abraham yet, but Abram. Before God changed Abraham's name, he was Abram. And he didn't see himself as who God said he was. God said, you're going to be a father of many nations. But yet here he's still Abram. And then it goes through this whole, right after that is when he changes his name. So he's saying, Abram, I am God Almighty. And then he changes his name. Let's go to Genesis chapter 28. And we're going to look at verse 3. So Genesis 28, verse 3. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you. And then let's look at Genesis 35 and verse 11. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. So what does El Shaddai mean? God Almighty. Think of that. God Almighty. No matter what circumstances we're going through, we have El Shaddai on our side. God Almighty. Here when Abram was saying, God, you said I'm the father of many nations. You said I'm going to have a son. How can this be? At 99 years old, look what's happening. He said, God Almighty is with you. For I am the God Almighty. What does that mean? Nothing's impossible. I mean, it goes on later, and when we're talking about Abraham, and it said how Sarah had laughed, and he goes, does she not know that nothing's impossible with me? Nothing's too hard for me. Why? Because I'm El Shaddai. I am God Almighty. I also saw this definition. When we say El Shaddai, it's the idea that God's power and provision is more than enough to meet any need. That is who God is. And he can be. Maybe you're saying, well, he's not El Shaddai to me right now. Well, get in his word. Start calling out to him. God, I believe you are El Shaddai. You are the God Almighty. You are the God of more than enough. There is none beside you. And when you start looking to him as El Shaddai, being the God who has more than enough to meet any of your needs, then you will see El Shaddai work on your behalf.